Imagine a kitchen at the end of the 19th century. Numb of a refrigerator. No fluorescent light overhead. Only the crackle of firewood and a warm aroma rising from a cast iron pot hanging on an iron hook. On the wooden shelf behind the hearth sit two white jars. No labels. No ingredient lists. Just two solidified blocks of fat. Quiet and resolute. One came from the pasture tallow.
I'm so glad we decided
two rendered
to
beef
come out
fat.
Today.
The other from the family farm lard.
This
Rendered
is
pork
exactly
fat.
what I needed.
They were not merely ingredients. They were the remainder of an animal used in its entirety. The result of an agricultural cycle in which the concept of waste did not exist. In that kitchen, fat was not viewed as a health threat. It was energy. It was light. It was the structure of bread and the crisp crust of supper. Today, those two jars have nearly disappeared from the modern kitchen shelf. And with them, perhaps we have also lost something deeper, a direct understanding of where our food comes from. Fat once functioned as the geographical map of a culture. In the grasslands of Europe and North America, where cattle dominated the landscape, tallow appeared in nearly every kitchen.
The trail seems to
rural
open up
regions
around
where
that
pigs
bend.
were easy to raise
Perfect,
and
I
could
could use a
consume
break.
almost anything, lard became the primary cooking fat. Each reflected climate, ecosystem, and husbandry practices. In 18th century England, pie crusts were made with lard because of its crystalline structure. Solid fat crystals weave between strands of gluten, preventing the protein network from forming too tightly. The result, a crust that
look at it
separates
go.
into delicate, flaky layers. In Mexico, tortillas fried
If we
in
look
pork
at the
fat
Q3
achieve their
projections here,
characteristic
we see a
crispness
significant
due to
upward
lard's
trend.
moderate melting
the
point
market
and its
volatility
ability to
didn't
penetrate
impact this
deeply
sector.
into the starch matrix. At the molecular level, lard contains a high proportion of oleic acid, a monounsaturated fatty acid. The cis double bond in its structure introduces a slight kink in the carbon chain, preventing the molecules from packing tightly together. This is why lard remains softer at room temperature and melts smoothly on the tongue. Tallow, by contrast, is rich in stearic and palmitic acids. These saturated fatty acids have straight chains that align closely and pack densely. As a result, tallow is firmer and more heat stable.
Look
In
at
old
the C3
kitchens,
readings. The
no chemical
stabilization
analysis was
matrix is
required to
holding.
understand this.
Confirmed. The
Observation
decay rate
was
is
enough.
exactly as
Tallow
predicted.
produced a
We can
resilient,
move forward with the synthesis.
enduring fry. Lard created tender pastry. Fat, then, was part of the local ecosystem. There was no concept of a global brand, only adaptation between people and land. But tallow did more than fill frying pans. It once illuminated the world. Before widespread electrification, tallow candles were the primary source of light in many households. When burned, the long hydrocarbon chains and fatty acids react with oxygen, producing carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of heat and light. It is the same oxidation reaction that occurs inside human mitochondria when we burn fat to generate ATP. In the early Industrial Revolution, tallow also served as a lubricant for gears and rotating shafts. Its viscosity and thermal stability reduced friction between metal surfaces. A fat drawn from pasture lands quietly contributed to the motion of the first machines. Biologically speaking, fat is the most efficient energy reserve nature has ever devised. Each gram provides approximately 9 kilocalories, nearly twice that of carbohydrates. The triglyceride structure allows energy storage without binding water, making it compact and dense. In agricultural societies dominated by physical labor and harsh winters, tallow represented security against scarcity.
No way, you
It was not a
cheated.
luxury. It was a survival strategy. Seen from this perspective, tallow was more than beef fat. It was compressed sunlight energy stored from grass, from grazing animals, from time itself. A symbol of resilience. If tallow embodied strength and endurance, lard symbolized refinement. In classical baking traditions, particularly in 19th century Europe and America, lard, especially leaf lard, the fat surrounding a pig's kidneys was regarded as white gold. Leaf lard possessed a neutral flavor and exceptional purity. When mixed into dough, tiny fat particles coat starch and protein, forming microscopic air pockets during baking. As heat rises, water within the dough transforms into steam, pushing layers apart. Fat crystals melt between approximately 30–40 degrees Celsius, leaving behind delicate gaps and producing a flaky structure crisp, yet never dry. No other fat fully recreates this effect. Butter contains roughly 15–20% water, which can alter structure and produce a softer, more tender crumb. Lard, by contrast, is composed almost entirely of lipids, functioning like an invisible architect within the dough. From a sensory perspective, the monounsaturated fatty acids in lard have a melting point close to human body temperature. Once in the mouth, they melt rapidly, carrying aromatic compounds and creating a smooth, almost velvety mouthfeel. The 20th century brought a profound transformation. Refined vegetable oils, products of industrialization and advances in mechanical pressing and solvent extraction, gradually replaced animal fats in the kitchen. Lightweight, transparent plastic bottles began to dominate supermarket shelves. At the same time, nutritional campaigns linked animal fats to cardiovascular disease. A complex scientific debate was distilled into a simplified slogan: reduce saturated fat. Tallow and lard retreated from the spotlight not because their chemical properties had suddenly changed, but because the social context around them had. Vegetable oils, rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids with multiple double bonds, offered advantages in supply and cost. Yet those same double bonds also make them more susceptible to oxidation when heated, producing byproducts such as aldehydes and peroxides. This does not make vegetable oils the villain. Rather, it reminds us that every choice involves trade-offs. When we moved from 2 ceramic jars to clear plastic bottles, we did more than change cooking ingredients. We altered our relationship with the origins of our food. The 2 white jars slowly disappeared from kitchen shelves, not through a loud revolution, but through a prolonged silence. Tallow and lard are not relics of an outdated past. They represent a philosophy of living, to use fully what nature provides. At the molecular level, they are long carbon chains stored sunlight transformed through grass, through the animal, and ultimately onto the table. At the cultural level, they are bridges between people and land, between harvest and dinner. Perhaps the question is not whether we should entirely return to those 2 white jars. Rather, it is this: what can we learn from the way our ancestors understood and respected them? In a world where food grows increasingly detached from its origins, the memory of those 2 white jars reminds us that perfection does not always come from the newest technology, but sometimes from a deep understanding of the simplest things.